And yeah, let's get started. So Ben is the assistant director for the U Asia campus in Incheon, South Korea. And Ben has a really interesting story, which is why I asked him to be part of a discussion today, because I know after working at the U for a number of years, we have a lot of students that are in similar situations. And I think that some of what Ben is going to talk about today will ring true for a lot of people that have lived across cultural contexts. It really impacts your day-to-day life. And while there are amazing benefits, there are also some challenges and some drawbacks, and Ben's experienced all of them. And so I thought it'd be great to have a conversation about that. He'll tell you Ben was born in Boise, Idaho, but his family moved to Asia when he was young. He's moved all over the place and can tell you more about that himself. But we'll start, Ben, with, can you just give us a little bit of background and help us understand kind of why you're here today and the story you have to tell?
Well, I'm here today because you told me to be here today.
Oh, and he's good at following directions. So.
That's right. I salute you well. No,
Thank you.
thank you, Cecily. And it's good to see. I'm looking on this right now. I'm seeing a ton of familiar names and some not so familiar. But either way, thank you guys for joining. This is going to be fun. Usually, I'm on the side that Cecily's on. I'm the one asking the questions. Yeah. So hopefully people can resonate with the story. And I know I see Nick on there. My buddy Nick's on here, and Margaret, and my wife's on here, so everything's good. So,
No pressure.
but there's a lot of people on here that I don't recognize names, and that's even better. So, but we'll see what happens, and we'll just go with this and have a good time. But yeah, thank you, Cecily. This is a treat. Being part of International Week is, you're going to hear me talk about the whole concept of home a lot during this presentation, but the whole international vibe in the International Week, nothing to me ironically makes more sense than being part of this International Week. So I thank you for having me. But yeah, I'm my current position at the U. I am the assistant director of international admissions for the Utah Asia campus, which gets a little tricky because I am based out of Salt Lake. I am here on the Salt Lake campus. However, I represent the campus that the U has in Songdo, South Korea. So we actually have two campuses. And I get to spend a lot of time promoting that campus. I get spend a lot of time recruiting for that campus, doing speaking engagements for that campus, and doing some liaison work, not only promoting this campus here in Salt Lake City, which this university is a fantastic university, but also getting, to kind of go back to my roots in a weird way and talk about living overseas and what it's like to go to school overseas, especially in Asia. I spend a lot of time on airplanes with this job, and I spend a lot of time in hotels, and waking up forgetting sometimes where you are is both a blessing and a curse, but it's something that I definitely am used to from my background, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. But to many that may sound busy and not so fun, but to me it's just a part of who I am, and it's exciting. I never wake up sad that I'm going to be getting on an airplane, exploring a new place or meeting new people. So to me it's a normal way of life, and that's why it's been a fantastic transition into this job after so many years as a teacher and as an administrator in education. So but yeah, that's what I do here at the U. Originally, yeah, let's get into my background. I hope you have a minute. That's what I always joke with. I hope you have some time, because it's not just a simple 2-minute little speech, but so get comfortable, I guess is what you're saying, or what I'm saying. So yeah, the short and the long of it, 27 houses by the time I was 37 years old. I spent a lot of time both stateside and overseas. I was born, like you said, actually, I kind of lied to you, Cecily. I was born just outside of Boise. Right now. It's my fault, not your fault. Ironically, a small town called Jerome, Idaho. It's a farming town, and it's a very tiny town, which is so ironic that that's where I took my first breath on this planet. But then to see and look at all the places I've been to and the experiences that I've had, I don't think too many people that were born or come out of Jerome, Idaho, get to or have gotten to experience the things I have. It's and that's nothing against Jerome. I'm a proud Jerome homie, as they say, but it's been a wild ride, and one I can't wait to get into more here. But I didn't stay in Jerome long. I am a proud Idahoan by birth, but after being there about a year and a half, my dad actually accepted a job on the corporate side of McDonald's. And from there, we moved to, my first move actually happened when I was a year and a half old, and we moved to just outside of Chicago, Illinois. As my dad was in the corporate side of McDonald's, the headquarters at the time were in Oak Brook, Illinois. And we lived in Bolingbrook, Illinois. That's where I spent preschool through second grade. It's a growing age, even at those younger age years, but that's why people that know me know full on that I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, Bears fan, Blackhawks fan. And that's actually why, because at that age, you're starting to kind of somewhat understand the world and in the priorities, you know, being sports. But yeah, I'm still a diehard Cubs fan, Bears fan, and Bulls fan, and Blackhawks fan. But anytime I get a chance to go back to Chicago, I do it with open arms. It's, as you're going to learn real quick, that's one of the many homes that that I've had throughout my life. So, but after 7 years of being in Chicago and really enjoying that, I do have, you know, obviously I was young. I was a year and a half old up till about 7 years old. And I do have memories, you know, the early memories of kindergarten and you know, early schooling and friends in the neighborhood and things like that. But we ended up, my dad was gone a lot. I'll just be openly honest about this and transparent. He was gone a lot with his job. My dad grew up a lot like I did. He was actually a military brat though. So he wasn't, his, how do I say this correctly? Like his lifestyle, he was on military bases, moving all over the place. So he got it. He understood it. He had you know, a yearning to be in different places, see the world, things like that. He met my mom when they were in college, and my mom was just the opposite. She was a small town Pocatello, Idaho girl. I could get into that whole story, but that's a whole different interview, and you know, and talk about how they met. But long story short, we ended up moving to Hong Kong because I wasn't seeing my dad a lot. It was like 3 months out of the year. He was always working internationally, traveling, things like that. And so he put in for a position that could move the whole entire family overseas, specifically to Hong Kong. And so as a 7-year-old kid, we moved to Hong Kong. That was my first taste of international life. Cecily, you and I have talked about this, but yeah, when you're that young, you know, you can't really differentiate the difference between Hong Kong and California or another state. It didn't really make any difference where we were moving. The fact is we were moving, and I was, you know, beginning that adventure of saying goodbye to friends even at an early age. And I wasn't going to bring this up, but I think it's a good intro here though. But if you guys know me, I tend to add some humor stories. Hopefully they're funny to you, but these are real life stories to me. But the first story I do remember of having about my international experiences is that day we moved from Chicago to where, you know, the neighborhood kids were all out there. We were all saying goodbye, lots of tears, crying, things like that. But my dad, you know, God love him, he had actually hired a limousine to take us to the airport to get on the, you know, the big plane to move to Hong Kong. Now, this is not normal. I want to be very clear in saying that. And my brother's watching, he can vouch for this. It's not like we had limo city going on. That was my first time and probably last time I was in a limo. But the story about it is we got into the limo. The limo driver was super nice. And my brother and I, of course, being kids, still thought about who got to sit in the front seat and who got to sit in the back seat. But we get into the limo, we're tears. The driver's handing us Kleenexes, and he just kept trying to consult, you know, and calm us down. And he's like, you know, he took a look at us, not knowing the situation and not knowing where we were moving to, but he turned right around and said, "Hey guys, it's okay. You're gonna be okay. I mean, at least it's not like you're moving to China or something." And it was just, I remember the tears just flowing and you know, the whole concept of like, oh man, this guy, poor guy. But he felt so bad. But long story short, we ended up on the plane. We moved to Hong Kong. I'm a little bit older. But we moved to Hong Kong in 1983, and that's when it was still under British rule. So we spent 3 years in Hong Kong. That's where I spent third, fourth, and fifth grade. Got to Hong Kong, but I should probably backtrack a little bit. The biggest fear I had at that age, like I said, as long as I knew that there were going to be kids my age, as long as I knew that, you know, my parents are going to be there, my brother was going to be there, it wasn't, in my opinion, too scary. The only thing that I was scared about, and Cecily does know the story, as I think a couple of you on here know the story, I couldn't use chopsticks. And so in my 7-year-old brain, I kept thinking like, this is going to be a problem. I'm never going to be able to eat, like crying on the airplane based on the fact that I was never going to be able to eat food because all I knew about Hong Kong is that they use chopsticks and Chinese food. Good news. By the time we landed, I figured out how to use chopsticks, and I didn't have to worry about always having a fork around my neck. So But when you're 7, those are the things that pop up in your head, and those are the things that you fear more than anything. But long story short, by the time we got to Hong Kong, like I said, spending 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade at an international school, Hong Kong International School, it was pretty easy. It was, like I said, it was under British rule. Everything was mainly in English. So, I mean, I got super lucky in a sense that my first experience to international life, even at a young age, was pretty easy. The acclimation process, excuse me, was pretty easy. From Hong Kong, though, we spent 3 years in Hong Kong. And then we ended up moving to Taipei, Taiwan. And I was in 6th grade, just the summer before 6th grade started. That was a little bit different. That was actually kind of a reality check, and there was some frustrations that we didn't have. It could have been the age too, when you're a preteen moving in general, but you just established yourself in Hong Kong, and you had really good friends that I'm still in touch with today. But I remember not necessarily wanting to go, but still being open to the idea and the fact that I'd been overseas a while. This was kind of starting to become commonplace, and I wasn't overly worried. But Taiwan was a little different. The culture was different. It was kind of old school Chinese feel. I get it 100% that Taiwan and China, they're not the same place. But it wasn't as openly, how do I say this correctly, easy to maneuver in transition as a preteen going there. On campus, I went to Taipei American School, and like I said, I see some people on here that were there when I was there. But on school, campus life, that was great. It was a lot of culture, a lot of people from different countries, but we all spoke the common language in terms of we were all there for the same reason. Our parents had been either transferred, or they were teachers, or they were government officials. But yeah, on campus at TAS, Taipei American School, was fairly easy. It was when you got off campus, then things were a little bit different. And that's probably, of all the places I've lived, that was probably the real true test of, okay, something's different, culture wise. But it was awesome. I mean, after spending those years in Hong Kong, and then starting middle school in Taipei, it was kind of setting the standard for what my life was going to be like. We actually stayed in Taipei. I stayed in Taipei till my senior year of high school. That was great. I mean, we'll get into the friendships later that I made there, and then I like to call it my chosen family. But that started to become normal to me, growing up internationally. Those flights home back to stateside in the summertime, and then going back overseas, it just became common. That was my life. I actually thought at the time, I thought everybody did that. I thought everybody spent time outside their passport country, and so in my head, it was normal. It wasn't till I graduated from TAS and moved back to the States. I mean, keep in mind, this was 10 years in the making. I remember thinking, like, I can't wait to get back stateside, because here I am, this 6'2" white kid, American kid, right? And all that. I was looking forward to, getting into that American culture and being in that American culture. And I should probably preface this by saying, if I haven't already, yeah, we did spend summers in the States. And so it wasn't like I was overseas in Asia the whole entire time. We would come back and see family, do some family trips, things like that. But my brother's 2 years older, and we would try our best to be these American kids in the summertime. But we were staying in, my grandparents lived here in Utah, and we would stay with them. And my other set of grandparents were from Pennsylvania, and we would stay with them. And my brother and I would do our very best to try to, pretend's not the right word, but do our best to be Americanized, and not knowing what we were doing at all. We'd go to the malls, we'd walk the walk, talk the talk, and do our best to enjoy things, and yet feeling so out of place. And so that was kind of the initial wake up call of, like, okay, something's a little bit different of how I'm growing up. This isn't necessarily normal. But when I did come back to the States, I went to a small school in North Carolina first, Brevard College. That allowed me to chase the dream of playing college baseball. I got to do that until an injury happened, and then I ended up transferring to Boise State. My dad had talked me into, it's maybe time for you to move home. And I still didn't know what that meant. I actually thought he meant move back to Taipei. And but long story short, I ended up back at Boise State, finished my undergrad at Boise State in education, and started to pursue a teaching degree. After graduation, ironically, at the time in Idaho, there weren't too many teaching jobs available. So I ended up coming down back here to Utah. Um, I had some part-time gigs, some part-time teaching gigs, covering for maternity leaves and long-term subbing things like that. But it wasn't really, I didn't really feel at place and at peace here in Utah yet. And so I had the opportunity after a couple of months of being down here to move to Texas. Ended up in Texas, took a job, then 9/11 happened, lost that job, didn't know where I was going to go. It was just one thing after another, kind of a spiral effect of my early 20s, but ended up back in Utah where I did take a teaching job. And a lot of people that know me probably don't even know this. I was this close to actually moving to Michigan because I had an opportunity to go teach there at a private school. And then right before I was about to sign and do that, the school closed for no apparent reason. I got a letter like 2 weeks before I was supposed to go. So I ended up staying in Utah. It all worked out, got a long-term job here. And which I ended up getting signed to a teaching contract here. And then 13 years later, I was still teaching here before I had the opportunity to go back overseas and be an administrator, director of admissions at an international school in Shanghai, China. That was fantastic. It scratched that itch big time getting back overseas. A lot of people thought I was crazy. They couldn't understand why I'd ever want to leave like the States and go back overseas. And in my head, it was just the flip flop of that. It was just, why would I not? Like, it made more sense to me to go overseas. And in the meantime, we're going to get into the discussion of concept of home later, but in the meantime, my parents had actually moved to Singapore. So there was no longer a deep connection to Taipei, even though I guess I kind of thought of that as home at the time. But I struggled mainly because my parents moved. I didn't speak to them for about 2 months because they had moved to the arch rival of our school in Taipei. They had moved to Singapore, and that's one of the other perks I'll get into later. But we traveled a lot and flew a lot to play international schools and sports and different things. And Singapore was always our biggest rival. So that's a side note. And I'll probably have a lot of side notes here. But yeah, I wasn't very happy with my parents when they moved to Singapore, not because of the international thing, but just more the 19-year-old brain of, mad that they moved to the rival school. But anyway, after Shanghai, loved it. I was there a couple of years, Shanghai Community International School, got to meet with tons of people. And my job was similar to what I'm doing now, in a sense that my role as an admissions person, as the director of admissions, was welcoming families that were coming for a look-see to decide where they were going to have their kids go to school. My ultimate job was to kind of calm their nerves and let them know that if someone like me, could come out of an environment like this, I thought their kids were going to be okay. And that was my favorite part of the job, because I got to talk to people who had those fears of international life, had those fears of raising a family internationally. I had been there, I had done that, and here I am doing it again. So it was one of those, it was just all lined up to be a perfect fit. And ended up leaving that job with a family illness. I came back to Utah because of that. Ended up teaching a couple more years here, and lo and behold, found this opportunity that the U was hiring for an admissions position, specifically representing the Utah Asia campus. And by a lot of luck and a lot of interviews and a lot of convincing of others to hire me, here I am. So it's been a great fit. I still travel a ton, with this job. That's the beauty of it. Essentially, this, but I've literally been on a plane the last 6 weeks, I think, and this is my first week off since the end of September. And I'll pick right back up again in January. But yeah, this has been a ride, and yet it doesn't feel awkward to me or stressful to me or annoying to me to always have to get up and pick up and go talk to people that maybe I didn't necessarily know, but I understand that the life choices they're about to make, and wanting to explore that concept of maybe moving overseas, and at the same time dealing with students that have been in that lifestyle and then coming back home or to the States and picking up again from there. So hopefully that was the short version. I think that just took 10 minutes to recap the last 25, 30 years of my life. But yeah, that's the extent of it. The short version of my life. But what isn't so short, and I didn't ultimately understand it growing up. And I think a lot of people that maybe are on this can relate to this if they grew up like I did. But there's so many blessings and curses of what we're, that living that lifestyle. It's not easy, but the perks, I really truly believe, outweigh the negative side of things. And we'll get into both of those in just a little bit. But I think that as a youngster, you don't really, the concept of home doesn't really hit you because, as long as you're cared for and you've got your family members and you've got a good core of friends, you're doing just fine. But the irony to this entire life journey that I've had, I've struggled more when I've moved back to my passport country twice now, as a college student and as an adult after Shanghai, than anything. And that finding that concept of home while it's getting better now that I'm married and I've got my tribe around me and great friends and people. There's always going to be that, I think, side of me that struggles to understand the concept of home. So there you go. There's my life story in 12 minutes, it looks like. So, but yeah, but that's my background. That's my upbringing. I American as can be, 6'2", I look like this, but there's a large part of me that still feels more comfortable internationally.
You did it, Ben.
Thank you. Okay, see you guys. Thanks for coming.
No, we have more questions for you. You're not
Okay.
that easy. So I think that one of the things that makes you really good in the role that you have right now, and I have to wonder if this comes out of having to be pretty adaptable as a kid, is that you are able to have conversations with a lot of different people and feel like embody kind of an approachability that I wonder if you kind of had to take that on as a kid. And can you speak to that and kind of some of the good things that you gained from that? And then also maybe some of the, challenging things, some of the good things about being a third culture kid and some of the bad things or the challenges that you faced.
Yeah, totally. So the biggest thing I can say is let's talk about that title, third culture kid, because most people, I'm looking around, a lot of people on this call understand that title, some don't. Third culture kid, it was something that I didn't even know there was a label or a title for people that grew up like I did. I was so young when we moved overseas. I just assumed everybody did this. I thought it was part of life for everybody. At some point they just moved internationally, and that was that. But the first time I even heard the term, I was actually working on a graduate school paper, and I was trying to find a book that was related to a culture class I was taking, and couldn't find it. And then Google, this is dating me big time, but Google was fairly new. And I remember typing in a search for culture and living overseas, and this title of Third Culture Kid popped up, and it was a book that's pretty well known in the community now, and I'll get to that later. But I remember looking at it going, I read the backside of it, and I thought, well, it kind of feels like who I am. And long story short, it's a great book, and I'll type in the title of it later. But it finally put a name to people who grew up like I did, and I had no idea what that was. When you're in the middle of growing up overseas, especially 20, 30 years ago, there was no talk of it. It was just what people were doing. It was just the way it was for a lot of us, and not bad or good, or it was just there wasn't really a label. It was just what people did. And third culture kid, for those who don't know, it's basically someone who is growing up outside of not only their parents' normal culture or passport country, but also their own. So, for example, my parents are both American. I have an American passport, was born here, but I wasn't growing up in my parents' culture because I was actually growing up in Asia. So it's a complicated process. Long story short, yeah, you're basically living and growing up outside of your own personal culture or passport culture or your parents' culture. Long story short, it gave me, an identification for the first time in a long time. To get to your question of the good and the bad, being a TCK, a third culture kid, there's a part of me that I don't like the word bad, because that infers that the whole thing was horrible and just never come back from it. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. And that's absolutely not the case. If you know me, I'm very proud of being a third culture kid. I like to say instead that it's the good and the confusing, because even as a grown man now, there are still moments in my current life where I have to kind of step back and process things because of how I grew up, versus if it if I grew up just here stateside. But I will start with the confusing. The biggest thing is, when I first moved internationally, like I said earlier, I was only 7, and I got lucky in a sense that I moved into a culture in Hong Kong that was pretty open-minded. It was pretty English friendly. That it was an expat community, but everybody seemed to just kind of gel together pretty quick, because it was, if you're going to move overseas internationally of any place in the world, Hong Kong at that time was pretty welcoming and open, and an easy transition. I like to joke, and maybe I've already said this, but as long as there were people my age, they like to play sports, they like to ride bikes, I was going to be just fine. Luckily, like I said earlier, that I was able to eat now because I could master chopsticks, but lo and behold, you didn't really even need to do that. There were plenty of forks all over Hong Kong too at the time. But it was there were things that you kind of picked up on in just little tiny cultural things that happen that you weren't recognizing maybe at the time, but then you pick up on, just differences between people and differences between cultures, and between even just food, even just the language. And I mean, Cantonese was actually, spoken a lot in Hong Kong. And I didn't always understand that, but I didn't really need to, because English was so predominant there. But Hong Kong has changed a lot now. I mean, politics aside, it's a little bit different of a place, but it's some place that it still rings true to me. And it was my first experience growing up, and so I'd love to go back when I can. There's a lot's changed, but a lot stayed the same. And I do recommend, if anybody ever has a chance to go to Hong Kong, there's nothing better than being down on Victoria Harbor, and especially during Chinese New Year and seeing fireworks shoot off. Again, little spoilage plug there, but yeah. But getting back to the bad, it was, I felt like it wasn't really that different, truly, even in Taipei, growing up the way I did. It was a process of, look, I was playing sports. I was a Cub Scout. I was, going to school dances. I had a ton of friends, still have a ton of those same friends. People, especially kids, are pretty adaptable anyway, and their surroundings and the acclimation process, honestly, the younger you are, kind of becomes norm and easier. So that was always a good thing, like being 7 when we moved internationally, and then 17 when I came back to the States for college. In my opinion, it was the perfect time frame to grow up overseas. Were there complications? Absolutely. Were there issues between cultures? Absolutely. I'm not going to sit here and tell you everything was just perfect all the time. But getting to see the things I saw at such an early age, and getting to experience, we would go on family trips, and this wasn't, I always used to think, we were pretty damn special, and we were, don't get me wrong, but it was kind of normal. Like we would take trips to other countries. Once you're overseas, especially in Asia, once you're there, everything's close. And so we would go to Bangkok, we would go to the Philippines, we would explore. That was something that was instilled, in me pretty young with my parents. You didn't have to like everything, even with the food, but they really pressed on my brother and I that you had to at least try things. And I really am super appreciative of that now as an adult, because, to me, if you're going to go somewhere and you're going to live that way, it's an important part to really experience the true identity of that culture and that place. And yeah, we were thrown into a lot of things, but I wouldn't have changed it for anything. Yeah. Coming back, though, on the other hand, and I've talked about this a little bit already, but coming back to the States, and even in those summer breaks and things like that, I think the biggest struggle that happens with people that grew up like I did, and people that grew up globally, and I can already hear some of the people on here, they're going to, I think, agree with me, but ironically, the biggest struggle is always being asked where you're from. It seems like such an easy question, and such a, kind of a minor question at the time, but when you grow up the way we do, it's hard to answer. It's still hard to answer for me, but being asked where you're from is a TCK, no matter who's asking it or where, it's being asked. If you ask any TCK, chances are you're going to get a long pause about where they're from, because first off, you're trying to read the person asking you. You're trying to read where their angle is, and that's not necessarily a good thing. But I still pick up on that when someone asks me where I'm from. It's like, what's the underlying tone? What's the hidden agenda between that question? And by the way, if you haven't picked up on this, TCKs tend to overthink a little bit too, right? So it's very common for us. But when I was in Hong Kong or in Taiwan, being asked where I was from, I was proud to say, the USA, I was from the States, and ironically, I would say that, but I wouldn't really understand what that meant. Even though, again, even though I looked the way I looked, and even though I, tried to dress and be that Americanized person, I didn't really have a connection to the States other than going to my grandparents' house in the summers. And then on the flip side of that, when we were here in the States and get asked where you were from, and you'd say Hong Kong or Taipei, and people would look at you and it was just like, okay. Or they would ask it, and this is kind of my ongoing answer to this, but when I was in the States and I'd always, be asked that, I still get asked that, you tend to get one of three responses. Like if I was even, this happens even now, but when I say that I'm from Asia or that I'm from Hong Kong or Taipei, or my parents lived in Singapore, that was a whole nother twist. I think I mentioned this, but my parents had moved to Singapore, and my mom, of course, being, motherly, was always like, you're from where your parents are. No, yeah, right. So because it was one of those things, like they moved to Singapore, and I'd been to Singapore as a tourist, and I'd gone and seen them in Christmas breaks and things like that, but I couldn't relate to being from Singapore. It was a touristy place to me, and and so that got complicated either. But getting back to what I was saying is that you usually tend to defend yourself with one of three answers. Or when someone asked me where I was from and you give them that answer, they'd be like, "Well, you don't look Chinese." I'm like, well, I'm not Chinese. Then you get into that whole process of explaining who you are. Or I get this one too, and this one still happens. Oh, I've been to California. It's a cool place. Like that doesn't even make sense, but it happens. And then the third one is usually when people think I'm lying. And essentially, you've heard me talk about my gas station story, but this is true. It happens all the time. For whatever reason, I must have one of those faces. But there's so many times I've been to just stores here in Utah specifically, and people think I'm somebody I'm not. They think I went to high school with them, and it happened a couple times at a gas station where I was being honest. I was pumping my gas, and somebody came up and said, "Dave, how's it going, man? I haven't seen you since high school." And I just was polite and looked at him like, "Yeah, hi. I think you got the wrong guy," like that kind of thing. And long story short, he kept pushing it, and he's like, "Have you talked to the old gang from high school?" And I'm like, "I've talked to a lot of my high school people, but I don't think it's the same gang." And the tone of the conversation took an automatic switch, and he just kept looking at me like, "What's your problem?" Like, no problem. He goes, "Well, where'd you go to high school then?" And then I say, being honest, Taipei, right? Taipei American School. And I would get cursed at, I would get yelled at. And the funniest part was when they would always, like, this guy, this Dave guy, I just remember him slamming his car door, and he drove away and said, "You were so much cooler in high school," right? So that's true. I like to think I actually was, but long story short, yeah, that happens all the time. And it's that connection to quote unquote being homeless, and people just not understanding you, and to be honest, you not really understanding you. But yeah, that happens a lot. And it can mess with your psyche a bit, even into adulthood. It does make you question your sense of belonging. It does make you question who you are, and really where you are from. I'm just looking at the clock, and I kind of want to get through this here. But when I first moved back to the States, speaking of colleges, I did go, I think I said this, I went to a small school in North Carolina first. And at the time, there was really no direction. It was kind of like you graduated from wherever you were graduating from overseas. They gave you a handshake, they handed you a diploma, and said good luck, right? And it's not necessarily a negative on them. It was just a different time. But there was no direction or guidance in terms of reacclimation. It was one of those things where you just assumed everything was going to be fine because you were moving home. You were moving back to your passport country. And truly, I played baseball. I had good friends in North Carolina, people that I still talk to, and same thing with Boise. I'm super close with a lot of my Boise buddies, and we still get together. But there's always just been that sense of, and it's an intrinsic thing. It's not an extrinsic thing, but it's more that intrinsic thing of like you just don't belong. Like you're always almost a couple, minutes or feet behind everybody else's terminology, lifestyle, understanding. You just didn't quite fit the part, no matter how much you looked the part. And that's probably still been the biggest struggle with me now. And I didn't know it, and I ended up in a dark place. And it wasn't until I talked to some of the other people that I grew up with. I always thought it was me. I always thought I was just me, having a rough go at things. But the only people I felt comfortable around were the same people that grew up with me, and yet we were spread out all over the world. And especially, we're talking 25 years ago, pre-technology, pre-internet, and smartphone. So it was hard to keep in touch. And so you just kind of, I put my head down and I didn't really, speak up, and I didn't really tell anybody. And it was not a very pleasant way to experience your college years, because that was supposed to be the fun time. And I'm not saying everybody goes through this either. There's a lot of people that had no problem transitioning back to their home country and everything worked out. But that's probably the negative side, or the confusing side, is just truly fighting that battle of figuring out where you belong. And then on the other side of it, getting that angle from people where you start overthinking and angling their reasoning for wanting to get to know you. It's like, it's just the damnedest thing, because you kept thinking like, okay, I should let them in, I need some friends, blah blah blah, but then it's like, what's their angle, what do they want from me? So yeah, I just kind of buried my head in the sand. I kind of put up walls, and I'm by no means am I saying that was the right way to handle things. It was just the way that I did. And sadly, it probably cost me a couple, friendships, if not a couple friendships and relationships, and it's my fault. But at the same time, you're trying to 18, 19 years old, you're trying to figure out who you are in general, much less trying to defeat this ongoing concept of where's home and who you are and your purpose. And, but then it just kind of started to, finally click in talking to people that I grew up with. The biggest, now we're going to flip to the good of growing up. I mean, the obvious is the obvious: the travel, the people that you meet, living between cultures, passport stamps, new food, new languages, international schools. I mean, those international schools, that's was my saving grace. Those people that I met there, especially in Taipei, we're still super close now, and we can bounce things off of each other even as adults. I don't have any kids myself, but I know a lot of the people that I'm still in communication with bounce parenting styles, versus how we grew up, things like that. So it's just that chosen family is probably what saved me. We still have ongoing group discussions. We still have, weekly sessions of where we just talk about life, and there's nothing, nothing's off the table, whether it's just silly stuff or it somehow always comes back around to people chiming in with where they're going, or maybe I'm going to this country, I'm going to go see this, and everybody gets excited for everybody, because you get it. You don't have to explain yourself. You get what they're going through. You get what their excitement is on their level between cultures, things like that. And a lot of us have gone and moved overseas and come back to our home countries, and I know some of them are raising their kids overseas, and it makes sense, and I applaud that. But yeah, the chosen family, it's it's truly what saved me, and I'm grateful for those people, because without even having to say anything or explain yourself, they just get you. I probably just went off on a huge tangent, Cecily. Sorry, but yeah, the perks definitely outweigh the negatives. But that negative thing, I always am skeptical to say, because to me it's more just a confusion thing. But yeah, that reacclimation process, honestly, it was probably the biggest struggle I've ever gone through. And I've done it twice, both as a teenager coming to college, and then coming back. Even just the 2 years that I spent in Shanghai, coming back as an adult, it's still a process to try to figure out your place.
No, I think it's interesting that you said that, because I think that for folks who grew up like I did, who didn't move around a ton. I mean, I moved domestically, but I think that one of the misconceptions is that like maybe moving abroad is the hardest part, right? But I've heard that from multiple people, that actually it's really hard to go home after you moved abroad. Like, because what is home then, right? You establish home in a new place, and you grow, and you become a different person. And when you come back to where you lived before, that place is different. You have a different set of friends. There are different challenges. And so I think, the challenges are on both sides. So I think it's interesting that you articulated that actually, coming back to the US was not necessarily the homecoming that some who haven't lived that life would expect for it to be, and that it just changes your concept of what your home is, where your landing place is.
Yeah, and the further I go down this road, and the older I get, I think it's safe to say, and again, I think if you've lived that life, you can relate to this. But home at some point stops being a physical place to people that grew up like I did, and you crave that. That's what you want. You want that stability. But I think that's kind of what's pulled me out of my little funk, is that you stop trying to force a place to be home, and instead it becomes more of a feeling, and the people that you're with, and just the vibe of that. I think it becomes more of an emotion and a feeling than a physical place. And that's taken me a long time to recognize and a long time to get to. But I truly believe that. But that's the biggest advice. I mean, we can jump right into this because I'm looking at the clock, but the biggest advice I could give to international students and anyone contemplating taking that leap and going overseas, it's a scary thing. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's just a perfect little easy jump, but the more I've traveled and the more places I've lived, at the end of the day, people are people, and people. I really, truly, sincerely believe this with every core in me. The world's a complicated place, and it's a messy place right now. But I do think most people from all over the place are super welcoming, and they want to experience other cultures, and they want to welcome you with open arms. And you can find trouble anywhere. I mean, that's just a fact. Here in Utah, you can find trouble if you're really looking for it. But I do think that for the most part, people are pretty damn accepting of who you are and welcome you into their world too. And that's kept me treading water. That's been the biggest, calm, I should say, is all these places I've been to. Of course, there's always going to be culture shock, and there's always going to be things that don't make sense right away. But you can't do what I did and block yourself off to the world. I think that's my biggest selling point. If you're going to do it with open arms. Go in there with an understanding that, yeah, there's going to be some issues, but the world is waiting for you. I truly do believe that. Be open-minded and dive right in. That's my biggest advice I can give anybody. If you're even remotely contemplating of maybe spending a semester overseas, or challenging yourself to go to a different country. Even, I know you just got back from Korea, Cecily, but it's your eyes just get open to the fact that I truly believe, and I've said this already, just people are people, and everybody at their core wants the same things. We all want to be happy. We all want stability. We all want safety. But it's just a matter of accepting their culture the way they'd want you to, accept yours. And maybe it does help that I'm 6'2", right? But I've truly never felt out of place internationally. I've felt, maybe lost a little bit, but I've never really felt out of place. And I think growing up globally and living internationally has taught me the importance that people like me are kind of from everywhere and nowhere. We talked about the chameleon effect before, but I do, despite cultural differences, people are people, and they want the same things out of life. And it's good to step outside your comfort zone from time to time.
Good reminder, Ben. And yes, you gave me great confidence in my recent travels. So thank you. Okay. I'm the opposite. I'm a little bit of a reluctant traveler in life, but yes, your advice has definitely helped me. And even though I haven't lived abroad, I think the concept of home has definitely been something that I've wrestled with in my own life. And so I love what you have said, to be kind of, in an early conversation we had, you mentioned being at home in the world. And I think that thinking that way has actually changed how I think of home as well. So I'm curious. Go ahead. Sorry. I was just going to say, I think we could open it up for questions if you are open to taking questions.
Can I say one thing real quick?
Yeah.
And just on that advice factor, because I luckily get to work with a lot of students too, and talk to students on my travels around, and their biggest question to me is always, what's your biggest recommendation? And I just truly, and this isn't to sound cheesy or to be like I'm this guru of international life. I just think I've been fortunate enough to live in so many places and meet so many people and have friendships globally. But it's truly about just having that, I think, the courage to be yourself and tell your story, right? I do truly believe, there will be people that don't understand your story, and there'll be people that don't get why you're doing things, and that's fine. I mean, I joke with you when I was knowing I was moving back to Shanghai. I'd broken my arm a couple of weeks earlier, and I had to get the cast off before I went. And when I went in there, the nurse was just like, so you have any plans this weekend? And I said I was moving to China. And she looked at me like, she thought I was kidding, of course, because that's just normal. And I'm used to that. But then she's like, why would you want to do that? And my response to her was like, why would you not? But to each their own. I'm not sitting here saying that everybody who had, the experience of growing up overseas had the exact same experience I did. There's plenty of people that come back to the States or their home countries and go back to life as normal and fit right in. It was just a chapter of who they are, and that's totally fine. I'm not sitting here thinking I was better or worse. It was just my story. but yeah, you control the things you can control, and you know, tiptoe outside that box of comfort. And I truly think the world, even though it's a messy place right now, I do think there's a lot more welcoming than there is standoffish. So anyway, that's my 2 cents there. So
Good advice. Thank you, Ben. Do we have any questions? Feel free to either turn your camera on or drop it in the chat, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Nick still thinks you're cool, by the way.
yeah, I just saw that. I've known Nick. Gosh, I've known Nick 30 plus
Margaret
years.
seconds that.
Same with Margaret. No, that's pretty funny. Yeah. Well, that was a funny thing when the guy did say that at the gas station. I thought, well, you're not wrong on that part, because I do think I was a lot cooler in high school.
Who wasn't cooler in high school, Ben?
Exactly. No, exactly. But no, but that was, yeah, that's, if there are no questions, that's awesome. But I do want to just, you know, say that after many years of teaching and still wondering where I fit in, things like that, that's one thing I can say. And this isn't just a plug of the University of Utah, but it's awesome to come to work every day with like-minded people that have that yearning and desire to travel and speak the language of international life, and they get what you're saying on certain things, and that you also learn from them. Because like I said, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know everything and I've got it all figured out. I mean, I'm in my 40s now, right? Barely clinging on still, but I still, you know, I still struggle with things, and that's okay. I think that's just called being human. But it's just a matter of finding your tribe and keeping your head up when things get tough, and talking to people. That's another thing I think I failed to mention. But if you are transitioning here, because one of the programs we have here with the UAC, the Asia campus, is that students from the Asia campus do spend a year here, and likewise they flip-flop. But it's being comfortable and asking for help when you need it too, because it's not just an easy transition, no matter how well you speak the language, you think you understand the culture. Yeah, so, but it's just being open, and don't do what I did, because I truly just went off thinking no one was going to understand me and no one wanted to have anything to do with me, and it did cause me, and I recognize that now. I'm sad about that, but yeah, just be open-minded, because I do think people are welcoming. Yeah, Coach Wyndham right there. Travel introduces you to many different cultures and expands your social awareness. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's just it makes you see the world differently, and as big as this world is, though, I also think it slows things down and makes you appreciate cultures and people too. But yeah, I still get excited. You know, anytime I get a chance to go to a new place, I'm super excited and run to the gate rather than walk to the gate. So it's yeah, I agree with you, Coach Wyndham. Yeah, he that's who that is. So
Thanks.
yeah. How are we doing on time? It looks like we're getting close. Yeah.
Getting close. Yeah, we're getting close.
Yeah. I should probably plug too. She's not gonna like this, but I'm gonna do it anyway. But even my wife, she didn't grow up as a TCK, but I do think it's important. Like I said earlier, you surround people with, you know, those that allow you to be you. And she tolerates me. I'm not always easy, shocker there, but she tolerates my TCK quirks and my cultural desire and my, you know, just little things that I don't always understand about how she grew up. She's from here, but she did get to travel a ton. So I do think that helps. She gets the travel connection when she was younger. But yeah, it's a calming thing, and that sense of home. We talked about that. I don't really feel like it's a physical place, but where those people are that, you know, love you for who you are, and you can love them right back. I think that starts to become your home place or your home base. And that's been important to me, and kind of getting me to kind of feel welcome and feel like I do have a place and a purpose. So, but yeah, people.
So Ben, this is not your first time talking about being a third culture kid. I know that you do this work kind of also on the side. You do some consulting and you do have a podcast, correct? Can you?
Yeah, I took a little break, but yeah, we're gonna get back into that. But yeah, it's yeah, I do have a podcast called
If folks want to like engage in this conversation with you beyond this hour that we have together today, where can they find you?
Yeah, so great question. Obviously here at work, I can type it into this too. ben.voegele@utah.edu is my easiest email, and I can type that here in a second. But the podcast has been there. It's on every podcast platform. There haven't been new episodes in a little bit of time, but I'm planning on getting back into that in December. So But I think there are at least 50 episodes, and the majority of the people that I've talked to and interviewed grew up a lot like I did, or they have some kind of connection to global travel or global interactions and living. So it's been cool. It's again, it makes you realize that the thoughts and the feels and all that stuff that you thought you were alone with and feeling, you weren't alone. And people even today, beenthere.org, yeah, that's my website. But if you go to that website, you can link up to the podcast. So I think there's a link to that on the podcast. But yeah, I give a lot of speaking. I do some speaking engagements. I wouldn't say a lot yet, but yeah, I've been published. I write about a bunch of these things, and yeah, the podcast is always fun because it's just I get a lot of therapy out of it just by talking to other people and hearing their experiences and similarities and differences. Because like I said, not every situation is always the same. So
yeah, I think it's really important. Thank you for being with us today and being willing to kind of share your story. I know from, we've worked with so many international students in our office, and we are very, very lucky to be in a very diverse community up here at the U. So a lot of people are experiencing some of these things, and it's something that impacts your everyday. And so I think that it's one of those things that's kind of always low key, like part of your life, but we don't often create a forum to talk about it. So thank you so much for opening the conversation today. And I hope people continue to talk about it, talk about what home means, how you develop a sense of place, no matter where you are. And
yeah, thank you for doing this. I mean, you were a rock star in this whole international week anyway. So I do appreciate and applaud what you're doing too. I know I'm not alone in saying that either. So thank you, Cecil.
thanks, Ben. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It is an honor. And I am very grateful for you sharing your voice and being a part of our team. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We appreciate it and hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. And thank you again, Ben. You're getting some claps.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, I better plug this before I get in trouble though, too. If you have any questions about the Utah Asia campus, please reach out to me through email, because we are trying to expand our campus over there too. And it's a fantastic experience.
Absolutely. I can vouch for that. I was just there.
Yeah. Cool.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, Cecily. Thanks everybody else for joining in. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.